the talk is from Dr. Sam Moorhead from the British Museum. He'll be talking about Carausius and Allectus coinage.
Thank you, Pete.
Yeah,
and thank you, Philippa and Joe, for all the organisation. After the excitement of Wirral brooches, you can go into stupor and sleep now. Coins are back again. Yes, most of what I'm going to talk about, which we know, will be published in the new Roman Imperial coinage, but there's a lot we still need to know. And so what I'm going to do is a quick run through where we stand at the moment. And this coinage follows on from what Philippa was talking about with the Connetio hoard. So her barbarous radiates end in about 285. Carausius kicks off in 286. And what Philippa has done is really interesting. I'm already trying to process it. That Siscia mint is very interesting because in the reign of Valentinian, you have a similar thing where Siscia behaves odd. So there are all sorts of things we can play around with. So Carausius and Allectus, very quickly, for those of you who don't know about them, Carausius was from Menapia, which is the Rhineland Delta region. He rose up through the ranks of the Roman army to be a general under the Emperor Maximian, who is here, and he was tasked with dealing with Saxon Germanic pirates. He had a fleet base at Boulogne. He built more of a fleet, and he ultimately started to crack down on the pirates. He was very successful. He was accused, though, of letting the pirates come in, taking the loot, and then he would intercept them on the way out and keep the loot for himself. And whether this is true or not is another matter, but he was sentenced to death by Maximian, but instead of taking his sentence, he rebelled. And there was probably several months of warfare in northern Gaul before he moved back to Britain. I don't think he necessarily flees, I put flees here, but it was a strategic retreat, I think you call it in military terms. And he then sets up his own imperial domain in Britain for 6 to 7 years, to be followed by Allectus, who lasts another 3 years. So the coinage I'm talking about is nearly all made in Britain, except for a little bit on the continent, and most of that was probably made at Rouen. In Britain, he creates what we might call Fortress Britain. So here we have Porchester, one of the forts he almost certainly built. He probably built much of Richborough. I think Lymm as well is on that list. A lot of these forts can be seen as part of his defensive system to keep the Central Empire at bay. And he does, in fact, defeat Maximian, who tries to invade by sea, and is a combination of weather and tactics. And so this is the first time that a British fleet is used to defend our shores. And he's succeeded or possibly assassinated by Allectus. Again, the story is a bit grey. Do read Barker and Moorhead 2023, the new popular version, to get an idea of what might be the answer, because Graham has done a lot more on this than I have. He's much more incisive into historical analysis. And Allectus builds Pevensey. And then finally, he's overcome by Constantius Chlorus, the new junior emperor in the West, with his general Asclepiodotus, who comes in past the Isle of Wight. Constantius Chlorus goes up to the Thames to London, and Allectus is defeated. And we're told by the sources that Britons were absolutely thrilled to be back in the Roman Empire. Discuss. So that's a summary of what happens. It's a breakaway 10 years. The coinages. So the first mint is almost certainly on the continent, and it's probably mostly moving with Carausius. When you're fighting a rearguard action, you don't leave a mint somewhere, although we know it's probably situated in Rouen for a while. And it strikes two types of coins, in gold and in bronze, the gold aureus on the left and the bronze radiate on the right, with a fairly generic portrait. The gold coin does show us that he probably took the consulship as soon as he became emperor. Then he goes to Britain, and in Britain we have the earliest coins are marked RSR, which is actually Redeant Saturnia Regna, Return of the Golden Age. That's another story, another lecture. But he strikes in gold, silver. His silver is exceptional, we'll see in a minute, and bronze again with radiates. And we then go through the next phase of unmarked coins, again in gold, in silver below, not so many of them in silver. And then on the right, we have bronze and silvered bronze. And these are an interesting little problem. This one here, very much probably next to no silver at all. The one below, which is also unmarked, probably a little bit later, is fully silvered. And this is going to be a problem I'll address later. The London Mint goes through various mint marks. So we have ML, LML, and then we have FOML and BE. All these series of mint marks. In fact, he's the first Roman emperor to actually have a simple sequence mark or sequence marks in his coinage. Probus had a few, but Carausius is a first. Very straightforward. C mint, not so simple. C mint, we don't know where it is. It's a long story. It could be Gloucester. People that used to say Colchester, I don't believe it. I still feel C mint is on the move quite a bit, but that's another story. But here we have a problem because the mint marks are not used just chronologically at one phase. They are used over a period of years. Every so often the C mark is used. So this coin here is very early. It's about 287. The one below is about 290. And so you can see that you can't just use the mark to date the coin. And MC, this coin, the same problem we have with those coins. We have other later MCs. But by the time you get to the 290s, the SCC coins here, nicely silvered, as you saw before on some of the unmarked coins. And then his last coinages, we have the MLXXI, the XXI referring to 20 parts copper to 1 part silver, so 5% silver, that's assumed. At London, and then at C mint, we have SPCs, and you can see again another nicely silvered one here. And that's the end of his reign, to be taken over by Allectus, who follows the same mint marks, SPML and SPC here, and he goes through a series at London through 3 issues and at the C mint through 2 issues only. But he introduces a new coin called the Q radiate. And the Q radiate is 2/3 the weight of a radiate, but as we're going to see, it has a silver content, which is slightly lower. So it almost certainly equates to half a radiate. And this was almost certainly intended to replace a lot of the radiates that Philippa was talking about, the horrible early Central Empire and Gallic Empire radiates that were still circulating, to replace them with a better quality coin. And this, again, we'll look at. So that is the coinages. So we then get to the question of actually what have the archaeometallurgists done for us so far? The gold of Carausius and Allectus. We know, just going through this, that we have an average of about 90. The gold is fairly consistent. They're very rare, though. And the fact that they're rare in the reign of Carausius almost certainly, the gold, where's it come from? It might be Dolichotti, which is here. Just note Mendip down here. We'll come to that in a minute. But we need trace element analysis to determine that. And that's one of the projects we need. The point I was making is gold is rare. And that's why we probably get these exceptional silver denarii of Carausius, which are of a higher quality than anything we've seen for over 200 years. And the 3 groups, there's RSRs, I mentioned, unmarked, and then some with funny marks on them, miscellaneous marks, which are almost certainly all early. And these coins all date to the very first 2 years of his reign. And almost certainly they're being produced to make up for the lack of gold. He doesn't have the gold stocks, so he produces top quality silver coins. We have over 450 of these now. They are quite common compared to what they were a few years ago because of PAS. And I have 41 of them now, which have been analysed by Duncan Hook, Quanyi Wang, Grattuze in Paris, Pete has done a number, and Matthew Pontin. So I've got a good range of these. And for example, Matthew and Duncan Hook did 2 analyses of the same coins in the Froome hoard, XRF from Duncan and drilling and sampling from Matthew. And you will see that the figures are almost identical. And this tells us that they weren't surface enriching the coins, because with many silver coins, they used to enrich the surface to make them appear more silver. And this is an absolute game changer for us, because now we know that Carausius was not attempting to do that. The quality was so good already, you don't need to. And if you look at the averages, they're coming in between 93, 94, 92.3, 93.7. This is just over sterling silver. That is the quality of his coinage. And in fact, you've got to go all the way back to Nero's reign to get anything similar. So they are exceptional. Now, there are some with a lower content, which is more relevant to what Pete and Philip are up to. And this is an example of one which has 53% silver, 38% copper, and 6.4% zinc. And I do wonder if the zinc isn't being added so as to keep the silvery colour in the coin, a clever device. And this is the slightly later style coin. I think that once the silver stocks began to decline, they were playing with the recipe to try and maintain a silver looking coin for as long as they could. The other reason the silver stocks were declining, though, is because they had to silver wash the radiates. Now, the other thing that this analysis has shown us, you get the odd crude coin like this one here, not particularly good style, and it's got a die link to a radiate. It could well be a forgery, and the silver content of only 30% or so does suggest it is, or it's very late on. So analysis helps us identify the irregular coins too. Sourcing of the silver. Matthew Ponton has done some work on those Froome coins, and to cut a long story short, he thinks the source of the silver was Gaul and Mendip. And that is interesting because if Carausius was indeed pinching silver plate and the like from pirates, that might be the source of his silver from the continent. And in Britain, obviously, Mendip, a major source as well, and he would exploit the sources in Britain. So there's a lot more scope, I think, for analysis of silver coins to try and trace the source of the silver, because they are so pure. They're certainly, it's very difficult to try and extract silver from radiates to then restrike as silver coins. Much quicker to get source the original silver. Then we get to the radiates, and this is where Pete and co come in. Much more to do with you. This is actually Pete's analysis, because these Rouen radiates, the very first ones, have next to no silver, 0.1%. They're copper, tin, and the various metals do vary, but we only have two. I'm suggesting we need to do the entire British Museum collection, and we then get a good idea of what the Rouen radiates have. Now, before we go too far and say only 0.1% silver, then what happens? Well, in Baldwin, the dealers, they had a large collection of coins from the 50s, which hadn't been looked at. And I went through them, and that top one has a silver wash, or is it a tin wash? So immediately it puts the cat amongst the pigeons. I think it's been sold now into a private collection. If I can retrieve it, I will. So therein lies a problem. They may well have been still silvering the surface to pass them off as having more silver than they had. And then we have this little group down below I've identified, which are later style coins of the Rouen style, which are nearly all found in Britain. And I think this is evidence that the mint came from the continent back to Britain. They started striking them in Britain. And these coins are much more common in the West Country and Wales. And I would love analysis of some of those to see how they compare with the other Rouen and the slightly later British coins. The early British radiates, RSR, unmarked, and the early London and Sea Mint marks, very little analysis. And at the moment, it seems to be they didn't have much silver at all. But I just need to do a whole lot more of those, just to see what they are doing in reality. I only have this one here, which is next to no silver at all. The other problem we have is to go back to Philippa, because Philippa has given us all those answers about the earlier radiates. This is an overstrike. Many of the first coins of Carausius were overstruck on earlier coins. You can just see the head here, top of the crown of Gallienus there. And so, of course, if you analyse these, they should fit into some of the earlier patterns which have come from the Kinetio hoard. And that is another little project we can do as well, because if you analyze these early coins, many of the overstrikes, you can't see that there's an undertype. The next problem we have is one that we just come back to with just the big discussion we just had about gunmetal, brass. I'm with Fraser. I think there's a real problem about using modern terminology to define these metals. This, I think, was called by Duncan gunmetal. As far as I'm concerned, it's probably a Sestertius that's been overstruck. It's certainly brass, and we have a lot of coins of Carausius in the early years which are being struck from earlier brass. So that's another analysis that will come out of early coins, is brass being used as well from Sestertii and earlier base metal coins. And with this base metal, we then go to where does it come from? This is the fort of Carnarvon, Saguntium here, massive fort. In the Carausian period, has an enormous expansion again of use and activity in the fort, probably because it was the base for mining up in North Wales. And we have Great Orm's Head, we have Paris Mountain. I know Pete has discussed this with me, and he's the pro, I'm not, but look at all the coin hoards up here. There's big activity going on in Northwest Wales, and this is probably where the copper is coming from. Again, lots of scope for analysis there. And then we get to the radiates, the later ones that have silver content. Now, if you see this, these are early coins, smaller module, lighter. The later coins, larger module, and heavier, and you can see they have silvering. And this happens after about a year or so of his reign. He then goes up to this larger size coin, and the weights are see now over four grams rather than being in the 3 grams range. And if we look at these, we'll see that the work done by a whole range of people, I've worked it out, averaged it, and we come to about 2.3% silver for these horrors from London and 2.6 for cement. So it's not the 5% we think it is, but then it may be, because there are issues with this. If we just go to Allectus, though, we'll see the silver is declining. Allectus is running out of silver. By the time you get to the end, it's coming under 2%. We need to have more analyses of these, though. We haven't got enough bulk analysis. We need to do a whole lot more to get a more reliable sample. For the Q radiates, again, we see the silver content is between 1 and 2%. It's slightly less than for the radiates. That's because they're 2/3 heavier, so they do come out at about half a radiate. So I know I'm going through fast, but almost done. Why is there not 5% silver, which the XXI mark suggests? Well, here we have 2 coins which are XXI. They should, in theory, be 5% silver. Herein lies the problem, and I'm sure there's an answer to it. On the left, you can see this is a coin with no apparent silvering surviving. That's common. I think 90% of all coins of Carausius and Allectus, they look like that. Then you get ones from hoards. So this is the Elvedon hoard. At the BM, you can see it has a silver tinge. There is quite a bit of surface work on these. Quan Yu Wang analysed a lot of these coins, and that's where she gets her stats from. So these 2.5% silver coins, this is what they look like from the analysis. But then you've got this coin from Froome, and Froome has not had analysis. And I asked the question of the professionals, how do you analyze a coin like that that's fully silvered? How can you tell me how much silver is in that coin without destroying it? That's what we need to know, because I bet you this is getting close to 5%. And that is the big challenge. So the 2 extremes we have, this is what Pete has to deal with when he's down in coins and metals. What can we do? This is just a summary. Gold, we need analysis of more coins, that trace element analysis to see sources. Silver, we need to analyze and identify coins for lower silver content. That's really what I want to know more about, the ones where you start to get base metal in there, to see if there's any trend about either keeping the stocks going or copies. Then silver trace element analysis like Matthews to identify the sources more. Only 3 have been done so far. The Rouen radiates, we need a complete survey of those, and we need to think about the silver wash on them and on some of the later style Rouen radiates as well need to be looked at. RSR unmarked early London cement when there's not much silver. Massive loads needs to be done there. And then we also need to look at overstruck coins and the use of brass, orichalcum from earlier periods. Can we trace any copper back to British sources? Large sample for all the Carausian and Allectus later radiates, and the problem of silver wash and how we find a way of determining how much silver is in a coin when it's fully silvered, as in the Froome hoard. So there's a lot to say right at speed.
Thank you very much. Before we get back to work to win our Nobel Prize, I think we've got time for a couple of quick questions, please. So my question is, you've laid out a very sensible, thorough program, which would help a great deal. I absolutely agree. How easy is it to then connect the incredible detail and scholarship on the coins with the wider material culture? How do we make sure that the questions we're asking about source overlap with wider archaeological debates?
Well, it would be fascinating to know. I mean, we just had Francis's Wirral brooches, and that metal must be coming up from the northwest. Similar copper source to this, possibly. I don't know. Can you start looking at the coins and seeing if the bronze, the copper and bronze tin sources are the same as some of the objects? Can you? Because am I not right in saying you've got all the experts in here on objects, and I don't pretend to know one object from another. But come to the late 3rd and 4th century, you don't have quite the mass of material that you had in the 1st and 2nd centuries, and earlier 3rd century. So are we not going to be relying more on coins, for example, as a background for later metalwork? I don't know. I think that's one area, and I'd love to know what the sources are, because it tells you about mining policy, sourcing policy in Britain. Everyone talks about mines in Britain. We have copper, we have silver, but who's actually talking about their products and where they're made? That, I think, is one thing. That probably where it fits in most. But yes, and also, looking at Philippa's work on Connettio, how this is different. I mean, how these recipes are different, which shows you an insularity, a British way of doing things rather than a continental way of doing things. I don't know. There are all sorts of questions, but I'm being very, very selfish. I want answers to these questions for my own personal reasons, I know, but I'm sure people can use that data, especially the mines. I think, the silver mines, the gold mines, the copper mines, I think they are what we really need to be able to trace back to.